I only needed somewhere to sleep. Then I realized that broken horse was hiding something.
No apartment, no shop, no family couch left open to her, just one canvas tool roll and the single dollar she had saved from her first carving sale. And with that dollar, she bought a wood-carved Carousel animal shop rotting near Coney Island in Kings County, New York, a place that had fallen off municipal maps in 1987. The north roof had opened 6 feet to weather. 2 rear floor beams had collapsed into black mud. The county condemned the shop on October 18, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. But inside a broken carousel horse, beyond the jumper pole hole, waited a sealed cavity untouched for decades, holding something no inspector had ever found. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Willa Mae Bennett had been carving her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Queens, she cut faces into bars of ivory soap with a butter knife, shaved birds from fallen branches, and once ruined a kitchen stool by turning one leg into what she insisted was a lion. Her mother called it waste. Willa kept every curled shaving in a coffee tin because she liked how wood remembered the direction of a blade. Her father, Daniel Bennett, had been gentler about such things. He repaired subway signal cabinets and came home smelling faintly of metal dust and rain. When Willa broke something, he never asked who had done it. He put the pieces on the table and said, "Show me where it failed." But it was Daniel's uncle, Silas Bennett, who taught her to see wood as something more patient than material. Every second Saturday, beginning when Willa was 9, her father drove her to Silas's narrow workshop behind a brick row house in Gravesend. Silas had carved replacement carousel figures for collectors, restorers, and small amusement parks that could no longer find craftsmen willing to do the work by hand. He wore a leather apron polished dark at the stomach and sharpened his gouges before Willa arrived, so the first sound she heard was always steel whispering over stone. Their ritual never changed. He gave her tea with too much milk. They swept the bench together. Then Silas chose one piece of basswood and made her study its grain before touching a tool. On one Saturday, he placed a heavy U-gouge in her palm and guided it beneath the shoulder of a half-carved horse. "Never force the turn," he said. "Build a core that can survive it." Willa understood only the wood then. A carousel animal could appear solid and still be built from carefully joined hollow blocks, lighter than it looked, with room inside for a seasonal movement. Strength was not the same as heaviness. A thing survived by knowing where it had to give. Silas died when she was 17. His workshop disappeared within a month. The landlord cleared it before Daniel could arrange storage. Benches, patterns, gouges, old paint recipes, photographs, unfinished animals, even Silas's silver-handled presentation chisel were sold, discarded, or carried away by strangers. Willa arrived late enough to find only pale rectangles on the wall where tools had hung. She carried that emptiness into adulthood. At 22, she believed she had escaped it when her closest friend, Adrian Cole, asked her to open a decorative woodworking studio with him in Brooklyn. Adrian spoke softly, dressed carefully, and had a way of placing documents beneath Willa's hand already turned to the signature page. He controlled the accounts because numbers, he said, distracted her from making. He controlled the landlord calls because she was too honest in negotiations. He controlled the bank meetings because lenders preferred one voice. Willa mistook certainty for competence. By September 2022, Adrian was gone. He had used loan documents bearing Willa's signature, opened credit in the company's name, withdrawn the remaining operating capital, and vanished before the lenders began calling. Some signatures were genuine, placed on papers whose full pages she had never been shown. Others were not. None of that stopped the machinery of debt quickly enough to save the shop. On October 3rd, 2 men changed the locks while Willa stood outside holding Silas's old canvas tool roll, the one object she had never stored inside. Her mother came. She stood beneath the awning in a beige raincoat, close enough to hear everything, holding her handbag against her ribs. Willa looked at her when the enforcement officer taped the seizure notice inside the glass. "Mom, please to tell them I did not know." Exactly 8 words. Her mother lowered her eyes. She did not lie against Willa. She did not defend her either. That silence lasted longer than the lock turning. 6 weeks followed without an address. Willa spent the first 4 nights in the Port Authority bus terminal until security began recognizing her coat. Then came a women's overnight room near Hell's Kitchen, 2 nights upright in a laundromat in Jersey City, 3 in the back seat of an acquaintance's parked Honda in Astoria, and 1 cold dawn beneath the fluorescent shelter of the Staten Island Ferry terminal. Her money diminished by exact, humiliating measures. $37 became $28 after a MetroCard refill and 2 bowls of soup. $28 became $14 after she paid for a hostel bunk she could not afford to keep. $14 became $6.80. She stopped buying coffee. She washed her socks in library sinks and dried them beneath hand dryers in 30-second bursts. The canvas roll stayed with her. Inside were 3 ordinary carving tools bought years after Silas died. A No. 7 gouge, a narrow V-tool, and a straight chisel. Nothing of his remained except what her hands remembered. On the morning of November 14th, rain drove Willa into the Central Library on Grand Army Plaza. She chose a table near a radiator, opened the classified notices mostly to look occupied, and found a county disposal listing printed in language so dry it almost concealed the absurdity. Abandoned commercial structure. Former Carousel figure carving premises. Coney Island vicinity. Structural failure. Contents included. Transfer price. $1. Buyer assumes remediation. Willa read it 3 times, then she found the photograph. Above a boarded doorway, barely visible beneath peeling paint, hung a carved wooden sign showing a horse rearing through gilt clouds. The carving had the deep-cut nostrils, flared chest, and wind-torn mane Silas had once called the old Coney Island hand. At the bottom of her pocket sat 1 folded dollar bill. She used the library phone to call the county number. The clerk who answered sounded tired. "You understand this is not a business opportunity." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the building may not survive winter." "Yes, ma'am." There was a pause. Willa pressed Silas's tool roll between her shoes. "What do I bring, identification?" the woman said. And $1. By 4 that afternoon, Willa had spent most of her remaining change on a bus ticket toward southern Brooklyn and kept the dollar untouched in the inner pocket of her coat. She did not know whether the old shop contained anything worth saving. She only knew that, for the first time in 6 weeks, she was traveling toward a door that might open. The bus left Atlantic Avenue before dawn, carrying Willa south through streets still wet from the night rain. She rode as far as the route would take her, then walked the remaining 4.5 miles with Silas's canvas tool roll tied beneath the flap of her borrowed backpack. Wind came hard off Gravesend Bay, smelling of salt, diesel, and old iron. By afternoon, the temperature had fallen to 34 degrees. She had expected to reach the property before dark. She did not. A wrong turn near Cropsey Avenue cost her nearly an hour, and when sleet began, she slipped through a broken side gate beside an abandoned stable yard and slept in a hay barn behind stacked bales that still held the faint summer smell of grass. The thermometer nailed beside the door read 29 degrees when she woke at 4:15. Her shoes were damp. She walked anyway. By sunrise, Coney Island was opening itself reluctantly. A metal shutter rattled upward at Neptune Hardware. Steam clouded the windows of Doris's Ocean Lunch. A delivery van idled outside Brighton Beach Bakery while a man carried flour sacks across the pavement. Farther down, the faded awning of Marconi Shoe Repair sagged above a locked door, and a hand-painted board at Shoreline Bait and Tackle announced, "Closed for season." The amusement towers beyond the rooftops looked skeletal in the gray morning. Willa entered the county property office at 8:32. Heat struck her face first. The room smelled of radiator dust, wet wool, and paper that had been handled for decades. Behind the counter sat a woman with silver hair cut bluntly at the jaw and a red pencil tucked horizontally through it like a carpenter's pin. Her brass nameplate read, "Mrs. Evelyn Hart Property Disposition." Clerk Willa gave her name. Mrs. Hart looked at the damp coat, the backpack, then the canvas tool roll. "You called yesterday?" "Yes, ma'am." The clerk removed a thick folder from beneath the counter. "You understand the roof has partial structural failure?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand there is no certified electrical service?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the water connection has been inactive 17 years?" "Yes, ma'am." You understand condemnation transfers with the deed? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Hart studied her. Most people, Willa realized, must have stopped answering before the fourth warning. The clerk opened the folder. There were photographs inside. Roof timbers blackened by damp, collapsed plaster, a doorway blocked with broken carousel figures. One image showed a lion lying on its side beneath fallen rafters, one carved paw still painted gold. Mrs. Hart tapped the page. The dollar does not purchase you a safe building. I know. It purchases responsibility. I know that, too. Willa reached inside her coat. The dollar had softened along its folds from being carried against her body. Mrs. Hart took it without ceremony. The deed transfer required 11 signatures. Each time Willa wrote Willa Mae Bennett, the name looked less like hers and more like someone else's decision. At the final page, Mrs. Hart pressed a brass county seal into a red ink pad and brought it down with both hands. The stamp made a small, hard sound. There, she said. Willa waited. Mrs. Hart did not release the papers. Her finger had stopped over Willa's surname, Bennett. Yes, you related to Silas Bennett. For a moment, Willa heard only the radiator ticking. He was my great-uncle. The clerk leaned back. The red pencil shifted slightly in her hair. I knew that name. Willa's hand tightened around the counter edge. Mrs. Hart turned toward a filing cabinet and pulled open the third drawer. She searched among hanging folders until she found an old municipal inspection card yellowed at the edges. Silas came through this office years ago, she said. Must have been the early 80s. He was looking for records on carving shops that had closed after the amusement companies started breaking up. You met him once. Mrs. Hart smiled without showing her teeth. He argued with our record supervisor for 40 minutes because someone had listed a carousel horse as wooden amusement equipment. That sounded like Silas. Willa lowered her eyes. What did he want with this shop? Mrs. Hart turned the card over. He asked who owned it, and no clear owner by then. Taxes had stopped, corporate records were tangled. He left his name in case anything surfaced. She placed the card on the counter. Beside an inspection date written in blue ink was Silas Bennett, carver. The handwriting was not his, but seeing the name beside the word struck Willa harder than she expected. He never mentioned it, she said. Maybe he never found what he was looking for. Mrs. Hart finally slid the deed across. To reach it, take Surf Avenue west past West 21st, turn inland before the old service lane, then follow the cracked asphalt behind the storage yards. When the pavement ends, keep left at the chain-link fence. You will think you have gone too far. How will I know I haven't? You'll see the horse. Outside, the sleet had stopped. Willa walked with the deed tucked flat beneath her shirt. She followed Surf Avenue past shuttered seasonal storefronts, then turned where Mrs. Hart had instructed. The streets narrowed behind warehouses and maintenance lots. Salt had whitened the pavement edges. At the end of one block, an elderly man was sweeping wet leaves from a concrete stoop. A brown dog with one white ear watched Willa pass. You looking for the carving place? The man called. She stopped. Yes. He rested both hands on the broom. Keep beyond those walnut trees. The dog gave one low bark. Does anyone live near it? The man shook his head. Not in it. Willa thanked him and continued. The walnut trees appeared behind a corrugated fence, 6 old trunks leaning inland from years of ocean wind. Beyond them, the ground widened into a forgotten industrial yard where weeds had grown through broken concrete. Then she saw the horse. It stood above the building's entrance, or what remained of it. The carved sign was nearly 8 feet long, mounted beneath a shallow roof peak. Its central horse reared above faded clouds with one foreleg missing and half its mane stripped to bare wood. The shop itself was longer than Willa had imagined, approximately 30 feet wide and 60 feet deep, built of brick at the lower walls with timber framing above. Tar paper peeled from portions of the roof. 2 sections had been patched long ago with corrugated metal, now orange with rust. A square chimney leaned slightly east. The front windows were boarded. Across the lintel, beneath decades of flaking paint, she could still read, Mariner Carousel Figure Works Animals. Chariots, Restoration. Willa stood neath the sign. The horse's carved eye remained, dark glass. Watching the road, the key from Mrs. Hart did not fit at first because the lock was packed with rust. Willa worked the straight chisel carefully around the plate, tapped twice with the heel of her hand, then turned the key while lifting the door. Something released inside. The door opened 3 inches. Cold air breathed out, not empty air, wood, old glue, damp plaster, and beneath it all a sweet, dry smell she knew before she could name it. Sawdust. Willa pushed harder. The lower edge scraped across warped flooring. Daylight entered behind her in a thin, widening blade. The front room had once been an office and finishing space. A long counter leaned away from the wall. Sheets of curled paper covered part of the floor, their edges fused together by old moisture. On one shelf stood 3 glass jars, clouded white inside. She touched nothing. Somewhere overhead, water dropped. One, then another, then silence. The floor responded differently beneath each step. Near the doorway, it gave a dry complaint. Beside the counter, it groaned deeper. Willa tested every board before trusting her weight. She passed through an interior doorway. The back room stopped her. It occupied most of the building. Even in ruin, it was unmistakably a carving shop. Shapes rose everywhere beneath dust and collapsed canvas. A lion without a jaw, an ostrich neck emerging from broken shelving. 3 horse bodies stacked along a wall, their legs removed for storage. Huge glued timber blocks sat split open where humidity had worked through old joints. Gesso peeled from unfinished figures and curled white scales. A wooden mane lay detached across one bench like something cut from a sleeping animal. Willa stepped closer to a horse whose head had never been completed. She ran one finger across its flank. Dust came away. Underneath was a gouge mark, then another, each deliberate, each still visible. Silas had taught her that factory-cut ornament repeated itself too perfectly. A hand left decisions behind. This room was full of them. By dusk, Willa had opened only the safest portion of one boarded window. She found an old horse blanket in a cabinet, shook it outside until the dust made her cough, then spread it on the front room floor where the joists felt firmest. Dinner was half a bread roll saved from the morning and water from a fountain she had passed 3 blocks away. Darkness arrived quickly. Without electricity, the shop changed. Traffic from Surf Avenue became distant enough to sound like water. Wind pressed beneath the roof metal and made one loose sheet lift, settle, lift again. Willa lay fully dressed with the canvas tool roll beneath her head. Cold moved upward through the boards. She could smell old rabbit skin glue now, brittle and faintly animal, mixed with damp wood and the mineral odor of plaster. At some point after midnight, a sound came from the back room, a slow wooden knock. Willa opened her eyes. She waited. Nothing followed. Probably timber contracting in the cold. She got up anyway. Moonlight came through the narrow opening she had made in the boarded window, reaching just far enough into the workroom to catch the side of one enormous carousel horse. Its head was missing. Its body lay on 2 trestles beneath fallen canvas, larger than any of the others. Through the center of its back ran a dark circular opening where the jumper pole had once passed vertically through the figure. Willa stood there barefoot on the cold boards, listening to the building settle around her. Then she returned to her blanket. She did not yet know why Silas had once searched county records for this place. She did not know what the headless horse had carried through all those silent years. But for the first time since losing everything, the roof above her belonged to no creditor, no partner, and no locked door she could be ordered away from. The carousel keeps turning. You only need a strong core to stay with it. By the 3rd morning, Willa had learned which parts of the shop could still be trusted. The hand pump beside the rear wall coughed rust-colored water for nearly 9 minutes before it ran clear enough to fill a kettle. The outhouse leaned toward the fence, but its floor remained sound. Inside, the shop announced every step differently. A hollow click near the finishing counter, a low complaint beside the chimney, and one dangerous silence near the collapsed rear beam where she marked the boards with chalk and did not step again. She began each day by listening. The building told the truth before people did. On the 4th morning, she walked back toward Neptune Hardware with $6.80 still divided between 2 pockets. A brass bell struck once when she entered. The store was narrow and deep, warmed by an iron radiator that hissed beside bins of screws sold by weight. Rope hung from ceiling hooks. The place smelled of machine oil, pine handles, and the faint peppery dust of old cardboard. Behind the counter stood a broad man in his late 60s with one eyebrow white and the other still black. He was fitting a wooden handle into a mason's hammer. "You're the girl in the carving shop." Willa stopped. "I suppose I am. Arthur Pike." His handshake was dry and careful. He looked at the list in her hand, then at her coat. "You have money? That means no." Willa said nothing. Arthur took the pencil from behind his ear. "I can give you 30 days. I don't have income yet." "I didn't ask that." "I might not have it in 30 days either," he wrote. "Bennett," on a cream-colored account card. "Then you tell me before 30 days. Willa looked at him. "Why?" Arthur slid open a drawer and removed a stained paperback with a cracked green spine. Complete Home Repair for Owner Builders, 1974 edition, because a condemned building is expensive enough without pride. He placed the book on the counter. No charge. Previous owner underlined everything twice. Willa bought only what she needed for the chimney first. A 6-inch wire flue brush for $11.75, 25 feet of fiberglass chimney rods for $8.40, a dust mask for $1.15, a small bag of refractory patch for $4.60, and a galvanized bucket for $2.25. Arthur wrote the balance onto her new account card. "Do not light anything until you can see daylight through the flue. I won't, and do not trust old brick because it looks old enough to know better." Back at the shop, Willa spent the rest of the day opening the chimney from both ends. The fireplace throat had been blocked with a sheet of tin and 3 dead mouse nests. She removed them with tongs, spread an old canvas beneath the opening, then climbed a fixed ladder to the safest roof section and tied herself by the waist to the chimney base with rope she had found in the workroom. She lowered the wire brush 1 rod at a time. The first pass stopped 11 feet down. She twisted clockwise, lifted 6 inches, dropped again, and felt something break loose. A column of black creosote fell into the fireplace below. Not flakes, chunks. She worked from above for 2 hours, then descended, coughed black into her sleeve, and continued from the firebox upward. She alternated directions until the brush passed cleanly through the entire flue. 6 hours after beginning, the galvanized bucket held nearly 20 pounds of soot, nesting debris, powdered mortar, and glassy creosote. She climbed outside once more. Looking down through the chimney, she saw a pale square, daylight. Only then did she patch 2 shallow mortar gaps near the smoke chamber and leave them overnight. The next afternoon, she built the smallest fire she could. 3 twisted sheets of newspaper, 6 dry splinters shaved from a broken pine shelf, 2 pieces of seasoned hardwood no thicker than her wrist. She struck 1 match, the flame trembled, caught the paper, then leaned toward the chimney. Smoke rose, none returned. Willa sat cross-legged on the floor and watched until the first wood collapsed into red coals. She heated water in a dented enamel saucepan she had scrubbed 3 times, then cooked half a cup of rice with 1 chopped onion. Doris had slipped into her hand that morning after hearing where she lived. It was the first hot meal Willa had eaten indoors in more than 6 weeks. She ate beside the fire with the repair book open on her knees. The shop warmed only a little. It was enough. Over the next 2 days, she began inventorying the back room, not for value, for order. She found a rack of 12 carving gouges with half the handles split, arranged by sweep rather than size. Beneath a canvas lay 3-joined basswood body blanks, hollow box construction visible where one seam had opened. A cabinet held glass eyes wrapped individually in newspaper dated 1969. On the western bench sat a jar of rhinestones used for bridles, most clouded with age. There were paper patterns pricked with tiny transfer holes, a box of brass rosettes shaped like sunbursts, 2 tins of hardened gesso, and a wooden mallet whose head had been worn almost oval by decades of striking steel. The headless horse remained on its trestles. Willa left it for last. Its torso measured nearly 7 feet from chest to rump and had been carved in the aggressive Coney Island style Silas admired. Muscles exaggerated beyond anatomy, veins raised beneath the neck, saddle blankets cut deep enough to catch shadow from across a midway. The animal had once been a jumper. A vertical pole hole passed through the center of its back. Willa brushed dust from the opening. A brass sleeve should have lined it. There was none. She inserted 2 fingers. The hole narrowed farther down than it should have. At first, she assumed swelling had closed the wood. Then she tapped the horse's side with the wooden handle of her chisel. Talk. She moved 6 inches. Talk. Near the pole opening, the sound changed. Tunk. Willa stopped. She tapped again. Tunk. The hollow construction itself was not strange. Silas had taught her how large carousel animals were built from laminated sections around an empty core, reducing weight and allowing the wood to move. But the resonance here was too small, too contained. She walked around the horse and pressed one shoulder. It shifted slightly on the trestles, heavy but not evenly so. She lifted at the flank. The rear rose. She tried near the chest. Almost nothing. Something inside had changed the balance. Willa brought a lantern closer. Deep within the jumper pole hole, about 14 inches below the back, she saw a circle that did not match the surrounding grain. She cleaned the opening with a soft brush. A disc appeared. Cedar. Not basswood. The edge had been fitted so tightly beneath old glue and darkened wax that it looked like part of the horse's internal structure. She did not pry it. Silas's voice arrived through the physical memory of the chisel in her hand. Never force the turn. Willa heated water. She wrapped a damp cloth around the end of a narrow dowel, pressed it carefully against the perimeter of the cedar disc, and let warmth soften whatever adhesive remained. Rabbit skin glue had a smell when it woke. Warm hide, old dust, something faintly sweet and sour. She worked for 40 minutes. The disc moved less than the width of a fingernail. She stopped, waited, warmed it again. On the 3rd attempt, the cedar circle turned, not outward, clockwise. Willa stared. It had been threaded onto a short wooden collar. She rotated it slowly with 2 hooked pieces of bent wire until the disc released into her palm. Behind it was darkness. A cavity had been deliberately cut into the thick internal blocking around the pole channel. Willa brought the lantern nearer. Something wrapped in oilcloth sat inside. She did not reach blindly. She found a pair of long cabinetmaker's tongs, wrapped the jaws in cloth, and withdrew the first package. It was narrow, then another, then a third. The last object was a rectangular tin box, dark with age. Willa arranged everything on the cleanest bench. She opened the narrow package first. Inside lay 4 carving gouges, not ordinary ones. The steel was dark but nearly free of rust, protected by grease and cloth. Each handle had been shaped from fruitwood and marked near the ferrule with a tiny incised B. Bennett. Willa sat down. She did not permit herself to decide whose they were. Not yet. The second package contained folded sheets of heavy paper tied with linen tape. She opened only the first page, technical drawings. Cross-sections of carousel animal bodies. Internal blocking. Laminated hollow box joints. Arrows showing wood movement under changing humidity. Measurements filled the margins in brown ink. One note had been written beside the jumper pole blocking, "Leave relief at cross grain. See end grain twice. Never lock the body against itself." Willa set the papers aside before her hands could dirty them. The third wrapping contained a single chisel. Its blade was narrow and polished. Its handle was silver, not plated. Solid enough that its weight changed the balance immediately in her palm. Near the butt was a small engraved horse, Silas's missing presentation chisel. Willa closed her fingers around it. For several seconds she did not move, then she placed it gently beside the drawings. The tin box remained. Its lid resisted until she slipped the edge of a putty knife beneath one corner. Air entered with a faint click. Inside were cloth rolls, paper bundles, and an envelope. Willa left the envelope where it was. She opened the money first because money could be counted without being understood. Bills lay flat beneath waxed paper, mostly older issues but carefully drawy. She counted once, then again, $48,900. $48,900. She wrote the number on the margin of an old invoice because seeing it made it no more believable. Below the bills were coin envelopes, 20 Morgan silver dollars, 11 peace dollars, 8 Barber half dollars. 4 gold Liberty head coins, each wrapped separately in soft cloth. She did not calculate their collector value. Their weight was enough. At the bottom of the box lay a medal suspended from a faded ribbon. Willa lifted it by the edges. A purple heart. On the reverse, beneath oxidation and scratches, was a name she did not recognize. Thomas E. Mariner. A folded service card beneath it carried the year 1944. Willa returned the medal to the box. Only then did she look at the envelope. Her name was not written on it. There was no name at all. On the front, in brown fountain pen ink, were 5 words. "My dear one, whoever you are." The handwriting stopped her. She had seen those capital M's before, on old birthday cards on labels Silas had written for sharpening stones. On the one surviving photograph Daniel kept in a kitchen drawer. Willa sat at the bench until the lantern flame shortened. Outside, evening had turned the windows black. She could have opened the letter. Instead, she folded the money back beneath its waxed paper, covered the drawings with clean cloth, and carried the tin box into the front room. Then she walked outside. The air had cleared. She followed the back fence until she reached a narrow view between buildings where the dark Atlantic showed beyond the amusement structures. The water moved almost invisibly under a low moon. Willa stood with her hands in her coat pockets. For once, she did not count what she had. She watched the tide come in. The carousel keeps turning. You only need a strong core to stay with it. Morning came gray through the narrow front window. Willa built no fire at first. She carried the tin box to the finishing counter, washed her hands in cold pump water, dried them on the inside of her shirt, and lifted the envelope beneath the window. The handwriting settled the question. Silas had made the same long downward stroke on the letter M in every birthday card he ever sent. Willa opened it with his silver chisel. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, then the horse held, that matters to me more than the money. My name is Silas Andrew Bennett, and I am writing this in Brooklyn on September 7th, 1988, 3 weeks after Dr. Miriam Feld at Methodist Hospital told me the cancer in my pancreas has already gone where knives cannot follow. She gave me months. Doctors have to speak in time. Carvers learn to speak in joints. You should know whose hands came before yours." Ephraim Bennett, my great-grandfather, came from Philadelphia to Brooklyn in 1889 and carved wagon ornaments before amusement work paid enough to feed a family. His daughter, Ruth Bennett Mariner, entered the shop in 1901 when women were expected to paint flowers after men carved the animals. By 1903, she was cutting eyes, mouths, and saddle scrolls herself. Her son, Elias Mariner, kept the benches through the Depression and taught his nephew, my father, Andrew Bennett, here in 1946. Andrew taught me after school beginning in 1952. 4 generations, if you count honestly, and not one of us invented the work. We only kept it moving. The trade in this building closed on October 17, 1957. After that came storage, unpaid taxes, broken leases, and men who believed machines could make a carving if they copied enough surfaces. For more than 30 years, almost no one came back who knew what these benches had been for. One did. My older brother, Thomas E. Mariner Bennett, enlisted in 1942 and was killed in France in September 1944. His Purple Heart is with this letter because our mother could not bear to display it and I could not bear to sell it. War takes a man all at once. Time takes a craft by teaspoons. So I hid what I could. The drawings matter more than the cash. When you build a large carousel body, keep the laminations balanced around the hollow core. Do not trap cross-grain inside a rigid box. Leave 1/8-inch relief where seasonal movement has nowhere else to go. Rabbit skin glue should never be boiled. Soak it cold first, then warm it slowly to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Too much heat makes it brittle before the joint ever learns its burden. For traditional gesso, work thin rather than proud. 10 parts whiting to roughly 1 part warmed glue by dry measure will get you close, but the brush tells the truth. Let each coat lose its wet shine before the next. When fitting the jumper pole sleeve, seal the end grain twice and test the bore after the body has rested at least 48 hours. A perfect hole cut too early becomes an imperfect one when the wood remembers the weather. You may wonder why money is hidden with instructions, because inheritance is not receiving what another person kept. It is being trusted with what they could not finish. Use the money only if it helps the work remain honest. Do not spend it trying to become important. Buy dry lumber, repair roofs, pay people fairly, sharpen steel before buying more steel, and if you cannot become a carver, that is no failure. Become the person who does not throw the patterns away. There is one more thing behind the shop. Find the old walnut nearest the southwest corner. At its roots is a low fieldstone marker with a shallow horse cut into the face. Do not move the stone. Just know Ruth put it there after Thomas left for war. Some things are not meant to be opened the first day. I do not know who you are. Perhaps you are family. Perhaps you are not. Blood can carry a name. Work carries memory farther. If your hands are careful, if you can wait for glue to set and wood to settle, if you understand that strength sometimes requires an empty place inside it, then this shop has something to give you. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Silas Andrew Bennett, Brooklyn. New York, September 7th, 1988. Willa read the letter twice. The second time, she stopped only once, at the sentence about becoming the person who did not throw the patterns away. Then she folded the pages along their original creases. Not new creases, the old ones. She returned them to the envelope, placed Silas's silver chisel across the top, and carried both through the back door. The southwest corner of the property was crowded with nettles, broken brick, and the roots of the oldest walnut tree. She worked slowly with a piece of scrap wood rather than a shovel. 6 inches beneath dead leaves, stone appeared. Not a grave marker, too low, too broad. A single fieldstone stood on edge, weathered almost smooth except for a shallow carved horse no larger than her palm. Willa brushed dirt from the groove, one foreleg lifted, a jumper. She did not move the stone. Behind her, wind worked through the walnut branches with a dry wooden clicking. Back inside, she searched the cabinets until she found one object she remembered from the cache. A small brass oil lamp wrapped beside the drawings, its wick hardened but intact. She cleaned the burner, trimmed the blackened wick, filled the reservoir with lamp oil from Arthur's store. When she struck the match, the flame climbed too high, smoked once, then steadied after she lowered it. Warm light reached the old gouge rack. It reached the headless horse. It reached Silas's letter. Willa sat beside it until afternoon. She began thinking, not about the people who had left her, but about those who had asked for nothing. Arthur Pike had written her name on credit before he knew whether she could pay. Doris at the lunch counter had pressed an onion and 2 rolls into a paper sack without calling it charity. Silas's. Hart had kept Silas's old inspection card instead of treating it as useless paper. Even the elderly man with the brown dog had stopped sweeping long enough to point her beyond the walnut trees. None of them had changed her life in one grand gesture. They had simply made the next 10 minutes possible. And sometimes a day was the whole bridge. Before we move on, think about one small kindness somebody once gave you when they had no reason to. Maybe it was a meal, a ride, a name remembered, or a door held open when everything else seemed closed. Tell us about that person in the comments. Small kindnesses travel farther than the people who give them ever get to see. That night, Willa did not return the objects to the horse. She wrapped the drawings in clean cotton and placed them inside the tin box. Silas's silver chisel lay beside her blanket. The metal rested near the wall, covered with cloth. And the letter stayed beneath her folded coat, close enough that when she woke once before dawn, she could reach out in the darkness and touch the edge of the envelope. The first snow came on December 3rd. 4 inches settled over the broken roof before dawn, filling the sag between 2 rafters and exposing every place where heat escaped. Willa stood in the yard with Arthur Pike's repair manual tucked beneath her coat and watched meltwater begin dripping through the workroom ceiling before breakfast. She read the roofing chapter 3 times. Then she measured. The main roof was 32 feet by 62, with enough surviving slope to keep rather than rebuild the entire frame. After subtracting the sound metal patches and adding 10% for waste, she calculated 21 squares of shingles, 6 rolls of felt, and nearly 60 pounds of galvanized roofing nails. Arthur looked over the figures once. "Your waste allowance is honest. I learned from being poor." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a roofing hatchet whose leather grip had gone almost black. My brother Owen's. Willa did not take it immediately. He roofed 40 years. Then I shouldn't lose it. That would irritate him considerably. The next morning, an older man named Frank Delaney arrived without calling. He was 72, narrow through the hips, with 2 fingers on his left hand permanently bent from an old ladder fall. He had roofed houses around Brooklyn before his knees persuaded him to stop. "I heard you're trying this alone. I can't pay much. Good. I refuse small insults." He climbed the ladder. That was the agreement. They worked 11 days. The worst rafter beneath the north opening was split nearly 5 feet along the grain. Frank showed Willa how to sister it with new lumber extending well beyond the damaged section. Clamped tight before bolting, she snapped chalk lines across the felt so the shingle courses would not wander. Her first row did anyway. Frank pointed with Owen's hatchet. "That nail's proud." Willa touched the head. "Pull it." She did. By the 4th day, he had taught her the 3-stroke roofing motion, set the nail, drive it nearly home, finish it flush without crushing the shingle surface. Tap, drive, seat 3 strokes, never 4. Snow melted from the south pitch while they worked the north. Cold water entered Willa's gloves and ran down both sleeves. Twice she climbed down simply to hold her hands against the stove. On December 14th, she drove the final ridge nail. Frank remained on the ladder long enough to inspect both slopes. "No leaks next rain," he said. "That a promise?" "No." "That's roofing." The first hard rain came 2 nights later. Willa placed 6 empty buckets beneath the places that had always dripped. By morning, every bucket was dry. January exposed what firelight had hidden. Several chimney bricks were spalling badly enough that their faces came away under Willa's thumb. Mortar near the roof line had turned to powder, and when she brushed one joint, half an inch disappeared into the wind. She did not use modern hard cement. Arthur found hydraulic lime in the back storage room and sold it to her at cost. Willa mixed 2 parts hydraulic lime to 1 part fine fire clay for the hotter internal repairs, adding water slowly until the mortar held a ridge on the trowel without slumping. The work took 3 weeks. Most mornings stayed in the 20s. She wore gloves while carrying brick, but removed them for pointing because she could not feel the joint properly through leather. Every 15 minutes her bare fingertips went numb. She stopped, warmed them, returned. Frank came once, looked up from the yard, and said only, "Your crown's too flat." Willa climbed back up and corrected it. She replaced the worst spalled bricks individually rather than dismantling sound courses. Loose mortar came out to a firm depth. Joints were dampened before repointing so the old brick would not steal moisture too quickly from the new lime. At night, she covered fresh work with burlap to slow the cure. Late in January, she waited for a still morning. She placed 1 twist of paper in the firebox, then kindling, then 2 dry splits. Smoke climbed cleanly. Outside, the chimney drew a thin gray line straight into the winter air. Willa stood in the yard until the fire was established. No smoke escaped the joints. None returned through the room. She went inside and put water on to boil. The floors demanded less courage and more patience. Most of the surviving boards were white pine, wide-planked and fastened with hand-cut rosehead nails whose irregular heads stood dark against the grain. Willa refused to replace soundboards merely because they looked old. She reset loose nails by hand. Then she rented a random Orbit floor sander for $14 a day. The machine nearly escaped her during the first pass, Arthur had warned her. "Let it work, don't wrestle it." She began with 80 grit to remove the gray surface and old grime without erasing every scar. Then 120. Then 220 only where the grain would tolerate it. The transformation was slow. Boards that had looked almost black became dark honey beneath the dust, then deepened toward mahogany once she wiped them clean. She saved the oldest gouges and burns. Those belonged to the room. After vacuuming twice, she applied the first oil coat with a folded cotton pad, working along the grain. The pine drank unevenly at first. A second coat brought the boards together. The third gave only a low sheen. Then she waited 48 hours. No rugs, no dragging furniture, no shortcuts. One morning during the work she woke before sunrise and could not make herself start the sander. Nothing had broken, no bill had arrived, no one had called. Still, she sat beside the cold stove with both boots on and did not move for nearly an hour. Eventually, she walked toward the marsh. A great blue heron stood in shallow water beyond a strip of dead reeds. Willa watched it hunt. It moved once every several minutes. One step, wait, then another. She stayed until afternoon. She did no work that day. The next morning, she returned to the floor. The oil had cured. Sunlight from the front window reached farther than before and lay across the boards in a long brown-gold strip. She walked over it in her socks. Nothing creaked beneath her. There were 8 windows worth saving. 3 had no glass at all. 4 had cracked panes held together with tape, cardboard, or old putty hardened like stone. 1 still contained an original wavy pane stamped in the corner with a maker's mark dated 1788, evidently salvaged from an older building long before the carving shop existed. Willa preserved that pane exactly where it was. She removed the others sash by sash. Arthur showed her how to warm brittle glazing compound before scraping so she would not fracture the wood beneath it. She rolled DAP 33 putty between her palms, pressed it into the rabbet, set each pane gently against glazing points, then tooled the outer bead in one continuous angled pass. Her first bead looked like rope. She scraped it out, started again. For the weights, she used 1/4-inch cotton sash cord. Each cord ran over its pulley, down through the pocket, and around the old iron counterweight with a figure-8 knot that tightened under load without slipping. The first repaired sash rose 6 inches and dropped. Willa stared at it. Arthur, who had come to deliver glass, listened once. Wrong weight, they changed it. The sash stayed exactly where she left it. By the 6th window, her hands knew the sequence: cut, set, point, putty, cord, balance. The 7th took half a day because the lower rail had rotted beneath old paint and required a small Dutchman repair fitted across sound grain. The 8th faced the walnut trees. It was the last opening, still covered by warped plywood. Willa removed the board in February sunlight. Cold air entered immediately. She fitted the repaired sash, tied the final counterweight, and tested it. Up, down. Still, outside, a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch not 10 feet from the glass. Its black cap caught the light. Willa rested both hands on the sill. The bird looked toward the window once, then hopped farther along the branch. Behind her, the workshop had changed its sound. Wind no longer crossed the room freely. The windows held. She closed the final sash and turned the latch. The plaster failed 3 times beside the chimney. Willa's first patch dried too quickly and cracked overnight. The second released from the wall in one clean piece. The third held 2 days, then sounded hollow beneath her knuckle. Only then did she stop trying to make new material behave like old material. Behind the broken sections, she found hand-split oak lath, each strip irregular and dark with age. The surviving plaster contained horsehair. Arthur disappeared into the loft above Neptune Hardware and returned with an old paper sack. My father kept everything. Inside was clean horsehair intended for plaster reinforcement. Willa mixed lime plaster until the fibers dispersed without clumping. She pressed a scored scratch coat through the oak lath so it formed keys behind the wall. Over that went a 3/8-inch brown coat. She waited 72 hours. The finished coat went on 1/8 inch thick, worked with a damp steel trowel until its surface met the old wall without pretending to be old itself. Willa stood back. The repairs remained visible if you knew where to look. She liked that. These patches will hold another 100 years. Then she washed the trowel before the lime could harden on it. Doris began leaving paper bags on the doorstep before sunrise. She owned Ocean Lunch and wore her gray hair beneath the same red scarf every morning. The bags contained things that could survive a workday: 2 boiled eggs, heel slices of bread, sometimes an apple, sometimes soup sealed inside an old canning jar. Willa carried the 3rd bag back to the cafe. I have money now. Doris continued wiping the counter, then save it for lumber. I should pay you, Doris pointed the wet cloth at her, in candles when the shop reopens. That was all she would accept. Caleb Freeman arrived one Saturday on a blue Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul balanced awkwardly across the handlebars. He was 16, all wrists and elbows with a cowlick that refused whatever effort had been made against it. "There's a walnut down behind our shed," he said, "dead 2 years. My dad said you could have the dry limbs." Willa looked at the maw. "You planning to split all of it?" He shrugged, my mother said. "About your grandfather." Silas had never been her grandfather, but Willa did not correct him. They split wood until both their palms blistered. When she tried to give Caleb $10, he put his hands behind his back and shook his head. The following Saturday, he returned anyway. Reverend Boyd never entered the shop. He was a tall man with a silver mustache and an old black overcoat polished shiny at the elbows. Each morning at approximately 7:20, he walked the same route toward a small church 3 streets inland. If Willa was outside, he tipped his hat. One February morning, he stopped at the gate while she was carrying broken plaster. "Roof holding so far." He nodded toward the building. "May your hands endure." 4 words. Then he continued walking. By March, Willa had begun recognizing the hour by the appearance of his hat beyond the walnut trees. She postponed the cellar until February 11th. The door lay beneath a warped panel at the rear of the finishing room, and when she finally opened it, 7 granite steps descended into air colder than the shop. The cellar measured 12 by 15 feet. Its floor was fieldstone packed tightly over earth, dry except along the northern wall. At the center lay one dressed granite slab, rectangular and unlike every other stone around it. A mark had been carved into its surface, a rearing horse. Willa knelt beside it. The slab had lifting notches. She did not use them. Silas's letter had taught her something beyond instructions. Not everything had to be opened because it could be. Under the 3rd stair, while clearing mouse nests and fragments of old lime mortar, she found a small oak box wedged against the stringer. Inside lay a brass key. Its bow had been shaped into the outline of a carousel horse. Beneath the key was a tintype. A young woman stood outside the same shop in summer light. Though the building behind her still had clean brick and tall windows, she held a carving gouge against one apron-covered hip. Willa brought the image closer to the cellar window. The woman had her face, not exactly, but enough to make Willa sit on the granite step, same narrow jaw, same uneven eyebrows, same slight downward turn at the left corner of the mouth. On the back, written in faded ink, "Ruth Bennett Mariner, daughter of Ephraim Bennett, age 25, summer of 1903. Willa carried the key upstairs. She tried no locks. It went onto the mantel beside Silas's silver chisel. For the moment, not knowing was permitted. Snow retreated from the yard in gray islands. The creak behind the storage lots became loud enough to hear through an open window. Walnut catkins lengthened from bare branches, and the chickadees began carrying fibers toward hidden nests. Willa cleaned the carving bench, then she left it empty. She had spent months imagining the day she would begin a full carousel animal. But spring showed her how much she still did not know, so she made a smaller decision. 1 coin from the cash would be sold. Only 1. The money would buy basswood, glue, whiting, brushes, and enough ordinary steel to practice without fear of ruining an heirloom. She cut sample joints, carved eyes into scrap, mixed gesso and cups, threw failed pieces into the stove. There would be no horse that spring. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Willa finished her first complete carousel animal. It was not a horse. She chose a rabbit. The body was built from a carefully laminated basswood around a hollow core, its internal blocking relieved wherever cross-grain would otherwise fight itself. She carved the rear haunches larger than life and swept the ears backward as though speed had caught them. 1 ear had to be removed and remade. The first cracked because she had ignored grain direction. She kept the broken ear above the bench. The finished rabbit received 8 thin coats of gesso, sanded between applications, then muted red trappings, cream fur, and small glass jewels along the breast collar. She did not sign the visible surface. Under the belly, where only a repairer might someday look, she cut WMB deck 2024 built hollow, built to move. By then, the shop no longer resembled a rescued ruin. The restored pine floors had darkened beneath use. 8 windows admitted winter light without admitting wind. Tools occupied the old rack again, some Silas's, some Willa's, and some bought cheaply from estate sales. The headless horse remained on its trestles. She had repaired its internal cavity but never replaced the missing head. It had already done its work. The brass key remained unexplained until December 17th. That morning, Willa was clearing ice from the oldest walnut when her scraper struck metal. Not in the ground, in the tree. A small brass plate had been set into an old wound on the trunk and nearly swallowed by decades of growth. Moss covered its lower edge. At the center was a keyhole. Willa went inside. She returned with the Carousel horse key. It turned once. A narrow iron-lined compartment released from the trunk. Inside was a folded 48-star American flag protected within waxed canvas. Beneath it lay a note. The handwriting was not Silas's. The paper was dated June 12, 1944. "My Thomas, you are somewhere in England, they tell me, waiting for whatever comes after Normandy. I have put this flag where our family puts things that must outlast fear. Your mother would say I am foolish to write to a man who cannot receive the page. Perhaps she is right. I only wanted one place where the truth could remain. You were a carver before you were a soldier. Your hands knew how to leave room inside wood so the seasons would not split it. I hope someone leaves room for you to come home." Ruth Bennett, Mariner Willa, did not read farther because there was no farther. She refolded the page. For nearly 81 years, the tree had grown around the compartment. Thomas had not come home. On September 18, 2025, the anniversary of his death in 1944, Willa carried his Purple Heart to Cypress Hills National Cemetery in Brooklyn. A cemetery archivist had helped her locate the record. Thomas E. Mariner Bennett rested beneath a government stone among thousands of others. There was no ceremony. Willa cleaned grass from the marker with her fingertips, placed the metal there long enough for the morning sun to reach it, then returned it to its cloth. The flag remained folded. Some objects did not require display to be honored. Of the money hidden inside the horse, Willa used very little. She sold 4 coins. One paid for the first load of proper carving basswood. One covered replacement flashing when a winter storm damaged the chimney. One bought a second-hand bandsaw with an intact guard. The fourth paid Frank Delaney after he finally agreed to accept money for repairing a roof section damaged by falling walnut limbs. He protested. Willa put the envelope into his truck anyway. The remaining bills, coins, drawings, and records went into a new sealed chest beneath the finishing bench. On its lid, she carved 3 words. For the next one, she made no legal mystery of it. Her will described exactly where the chest was, what belonged to the shop, and what must never be separated casually at auction. Silas had lost one workshop that way. She would not leave the same accident behind. The shop reopened without an announcement. Doris allowed Willa to pin one index card onto the corkboard beside Ocean Lunch's register. Hand-carved Carousel repair wood figures. Small Restorations Bennett Carving Shop asked Doris for the address. Doris read it. "You know everyone already knows the address, I know. Then why ask me, so you can decide whether they're annoying?" Doris considered that. Fair. The first customer brought a cracked wooden rooster from a child-sized carousel. The second brought nothing and simply wanted to watch. By spring, more than 40 names had accumulated on a mailing list kept in a school composition notebook. Willa sent no advertisements. She mailed postcards when a finished piece was available for viewing. Most people came quietly. Some did not buy anything. That was allowed, too. Caleb returned in May carrying a board under one arm. He was 19 then, taller, with the same impossible cowlick. "I made something." The board was walnut, carved by hand. Bennett Carousel Animal Works. The lettering was competent but uneven. Beneath it, attached on 2 small brass screws, was another piece. Daughters Willa ran her thumb along the carved ampersand. Caleb. "I know, I don't have daughters. I know, then explain." He leaned the sign against the bench. "My mother said shops live longer when somebody leaves room." Willa looked at him. "That sounds suspiciously like something she stole from me, probably." She installed the sign above the inside doorway. Not outside, there was no promise in it, only space. Years earlier, Adrian had placed documents in front of her and told her where to sign. Now, every agreement entering the shop was read aloud if necessary. Every apprentice owned their tools. Every restoration estimate listed materials separately from labor. No one signed a blank page. Willa did not speak about Adrian. there was nothing left there requiring speech. One evening after closing, she took out Silas's original letter. Its folds had softened from careful handling. Beside it, she placed a blank sheet of heavy paper. She sharpened a pencil, then began, "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, I hope the roof held." She stopped, crossed out hope, wrote, "If you have found this, then something held long enough for you to arrive. Better." She described the rabbit, the repaired chimney, Arthur's credit ledger, Doris's paper bags, Caleb's sign, Frank's roofing hatchet, returned after every use and still hanging beside the door. She wrote instructions, too, how long her preferred glue needed to bloom in cold water, where the south window cast the best raking light for judging a carved surface, which floorboard near the old horse still gave one harmless creak in February, and what not to hurry. She did not tell the future reader what kind of life to build. Silas had not done that to her. Near midnight, Willa set down the pencil and looked through the doorway toward the old jumper. The carousel keeps turning. You only need a strong core to stay with it. She folded her letter once, not to hide it yet, only to see where the crease would fall. Outside, the walnut branches moved against the dark. Inside, the carved rabbit stood beneath a cloth while its final varnish cured. The unfinished horses waited along the wall. Gouges rested with their sharpened edges turned inward. There would always be more work than one pair of hands could complete. That no longer seemed like failure. The wood-carved Carousel animal shop waits. It has always waited. And in the county property office, Mrs. Evelyn Hart had never deposited the dollar. She had slipped it into the shallow drawer beneath her brass stamp on the afternoon Willa signed the deed. Years later, when Mrs. Hart retired, her replacement found the bill there inside an envelope. Across the front in red pencil, Evelyn had written, "Paid in full. Do not spend."